Hey guys, Tisha here, and we are back with another reading of Love Times 3. I literally, like 10 minutes ago, just read the introduction, but I'm one of those people sometimes who, even if it doesn't interest me immediately, I gotta keep reading with hopes that it does. So we're gonna go ahead and read another chapter of this book because hopefully, since we got the intro out of the way, we'll get to the good stuff. So, this is chapter 1, A Peculiar People. To say our childhoods were idyllic might be going too far, but there's no question that each of us found growing up in a big family with several moms wonderful. Okay, so that means that all of them came from plural families. And big is definitely defined differently when it comes to plural families. Can you imagine what it's like to have 39 siblings, as Vicky and Val do? Those are the sisters. One thing for sure, none of us ever felt alone or unloved as a child. I can't imagine having that many siblings. I wonder how many parents there were, because whether people want to admit it or not, me having one child and be able to pour a majority of my attention into that child is different than me having 39. We grew up in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, attended public schools, and did just about everything other kids do. At times, our parents struggled to keep us clothed and fed, but we never felt deprived. What was hard was dealing with the prejudice about our family's lifestyle. Even so, our childhoods were great, and we were a big factor in our decisions to pursue the same family structure in our own lives. So they had great experiences with being in polygamous families, and as a result, they wanted to continue that. All right, Alina, I think this is the first wife, even though two of the wives were married on the same day. I believe this is the first wife. I grew up thinking the stars were aligned for me from the day of my birth. I was my father's seventh child, born on the seventh day of the month in the year of 1969, which seemed to have particular significance because it was mentioned so often in songs. Why bring up 1969 if there wasn't something unique about it? I was just sure I was really special, and nothing changed that, not even the 8 siblings that came after me. My ancestors were early converts to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and were among those who continued plural marriage when the church abandoned the practice. I was 2 years old when my father took my mother's sister as a second wife. So this woman had her mom as another mother, but it was also her aunt. Auntie had even helped me come up with my name before she married my dad. My 2 moms shared one house for several years before my father bought a second home for Aunt T, who would add 17 children to my mom's 15. Y'all, that's a lot. That is a lot. And I'm not just talking about in the fact that that's that many children, but do you know what birthing a child does to a woman's body? The amount of danger that woman is in while she is in the labor period. Like, scientifically, they say that while giving birth, the pain level should cause a woman to die. And these women did it 15 and 17 times. I give it up to them. Hand applause for them, because there is no way. But in all of my earliest memories, Auntie, my other mother, is there. She was the one who cooked dinner when my mother couldn't. She was the one who, when my mother was sick on Christmas, sewed new nightgowns for all the girls in the family. She made me the beautiful plaid dress with a big bow and lots of ruffles that was inside a box. I opened one Christmas morning, but I knew she wasn't my real mother. I was helping Auntie put away dishes in the kitchen one day, and I called out, "Hey, Mom, where does this go?" My hands flew to my mouth as I looked at Auntie and said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that." "That's okay, I love you, Alina," she said. My mom was elegant, reserved, and responsible. She liked to paint, wrote stories she tried to get published in Reader's Digest, and sang beautifully. Once, when I was very young, my mom got dressed to go on a date with my dad. She had on a green plaid bell-bottom pants, high-heeled boots, and matching jewelry. Her thick, curly auburn hair was down, tumbling over her shoulders. I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen as she walked out the door. Auntie was lovely too, with long, dark brown hair and bright blue eyes. That's something that sometimes turned green. She was vivacious and loved a good time. Vivacious and loved a good time. She was the one who made holidays and special occasions magical, planning the taffy pulls and other fun. I wonder what a taffy pull is. She always wanted to go places and do things. Maybe because they were so different, my two moms got along very well. I never heard them or my dad exchange cross words. My mom believed parents shouldn't involve children in adult problems. It wasn't until 3 days before my own marriage, at the age of 21, that I heard my dad and mom argue. Even then, they were trying to hide it. They thought I was asleep. My father had a deep, booming voice and a commanding presence that sometimes came across as gruff and intimidating. He was stocky and short, his pants dwarfed next to those of his long-legged daughters on the backyard clothesline. He loved pranks, often instigating wrestling matches and water fights that drove my mom's crazy. Money was always tight. My dad worked in construction, and there was a downturn in the industry during my childhood. When I was in first grade, my mom went to work secretly. Okay, hold on a second. How you go from hearing them argue for your wedding, I had to look to make sure I didn't miss something, to you talking about when you were in 5th grade. I guess she just wanted to say that was the first time she heard them argue. Okay. My mom went to work as a secretary, leaving me and the family, other young children, at Auntie's care. We wore hand-me-downs, and grew a big garden each summer so that we had lots of fresh food, and in the winter, home canned goods. Though we didn't have a lot of money, we were rich in other ways. We never lacked for companionship, and the holidays were always festive. On Thanksgiving, we would set up a big buffet, and the meal would last all day as friends and family stopped by. On Christmas Eve, we would wait anxiously for a visit from Santa, an uncle dressed up in the traditional red and white costume and accompanied by 3 or 4 of our grandmas. We didn't get a lot of presents, but there were so many of us that the tree was buried in packages. It would take forever to get them all opened. Christmas was organized chaos. In big families like mine, even the littlest children are expected to do chores. I was 4 when my mom taught me to wash dishes. 4. I need to tell my son that. He washes dishes, but 4? Oh, I lost my spot. The other kids were at school or napping when she pulled a chair up to the sink and had me stand on it as she carefully showed me how to wash the glass by rubbing a dish rag along the inside and the rim. Sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, turning the soap bubbles into tiny iridescent rainbows. The water was warm and silky. It was so cozy and comfortable and comforting to be working alongside her that the day has stayed with me all these years. When I was in 2nd grade, our house became too crowded and Auntie moved to a new home that was built about 15 minutes from our home in Mill Creek, a suburb of Salt Lake City. My moms would have preferred to live closer to one another. It would have saved them a lot of time since the children were always swapping back and forth between the 2 homes in what seemed like a never-ending slumber party. It probably would have saved them a lot of money too, because that's now 2 households that have to be taken care of. Neighborhood games really got underway once the other half of the family showed up at one house or the other. We take over the street or big open field for a round of kick the can or pomp, a version of touch football. On Sundays, we gathered at one of our homes for family religious services, which were always followed by a big dinner. There was one benefit to having moms live in different cities. Auntie's children went to different schools, so we were spared having to tell classmates and teachers why we all had the same last name, but our neighbors knew we were polygamous. And while most didn't like it, the gossip about my family usually went on behind our backs. In fourth grade, I became friends with an exchange student who moved in with the family on my block. She was from the Navajo reservation. We walked to school together, talking nonstop. One day she brought up my family. They say that you're polygamous, she told me. It's true, I said. Who cares, she said, shrugging. My uncle is too. But others were less accepting. One summer evening, a half dozen of my siblings and I were playing Foursquare on a big cement pad in front of our house. It was dusk, and we were going hard at it. A carload of teenagers drove by, and someone leaned out the window and yelled, "Polygamous! Polygamous!" It's an exclamation point. Along with someone's obscenities. We stood frozen until the car disappeared down the street. No one wanted to pick the game up again, so we went inside the house. Some of the older kids were mad, calling the teens a bunch of jerks. I didn't say anything, but it bothered me more than I let on. My stomach ached all night, and the next day, I was afraid to go to school. I hadn't been able to see who was in the car as it was whizzing by, so I couldn't rule out my classmates. Most of my siblings shrugged it off, but from that night on, I played in the backyard where I felt less exposed. That's sad. My grandmother, Nor, sometimes talked about how tough things were when her husband, Lewis, went to prison for polygamy in the 1940s, and about the discrimination my mother and the other children faced. My grandfather, who had 5 wives and 31 children, had refused to give up his plural families or abstain from talking about his beliefs. As a consequence, he spent 7 years in prison. Arnold Boss, my great-grandfather and my dad's side, was also in prison at the time. Home was a safe haven for me, but school seemed like a danger zone. I was proud of my family and my heritage, but believed I had to keep my background secret. I lived with the constant worry that my father might be taken to jail if the wrong people found out we were polygamous. I also feared being ridiculed and rejected by my classmates, which was why I had to develop a lot of trust before sharing anything about my family with someone at school. The friends I trusted enough to bring home had usually figured it out already, and discreetly let me know they didn't care about my family's lifestyle. I know you have a lot of siblings, and I'm fine with that, is how my best friend in the 7th grade put it to me. I think that this wasn't a kid's thing. It's amazing how parents will teach children things. It's like hate is taught, even in racism. Let's be clear, it's taught. It's not naturally for kids to be like, I don't like you because you're brown, or I don't like you because you're too dark. That's not what kids naturally do. It's something that they've heard or they learn just from what I've experienced and witnessed. That's the way I feel about it. But I couldn't control every situation that threatened my carefully knitted cocoon. The same year I was in my homeroom class, as the Student of the Month award was announced over the school intercom, the announcer was reading the description of the student. As soon as he said, "She has 11 siblings," I knew it was me. My face turned bright red and I slumped down in my seat. Afterward, all my classmates wanted to talk about was the size of my family. "I can't believe there are 12 kids in your family. Wow," they told me. My brother caught me in the hall later. "Congratulations," he said, shaking his head from side to side. "Tough luck, huh?" He was right. It was both good and bad at once. Some of my siblings didn't care what people thought about our family. For my 14th birthday, one of my sisters from Auntie planned a surprise party at my house. She invited 8 of my junior high school friends, only 2 of whom had been to my home previously. Another sister kept me away while they decorated the backyard with paper balloons and a big happy birthday sign. I was definitely surprised and mortified when I saw all these people I kept compartmentalized in my life gathered in the backyard. The number of siblings coming and going during the party was a dead giveaway. I knew that later on I would have to reveal my family to the girls who hadn't already known that we were polygamous. That's so sad that these are things that you have to think about as a teenager. My sister was hurt by my obvious lack of excitement and didn't understand my embarrassment, but that's how I typically handled my family background. I tried not to draw any attention to myself, even in extreme situations. That was my approach in another junior high incident as well. A girlfriend and I were walking home from school one afternoon with a silver Mercedes-Benz sedan pulled to the curb alongside us. The male driver, dressed in a business suit, rolled down the passenger window and called to us. We could see, even without moving from the sidewalk, that he had untucked his collar shirt and pulled down his slacks to show us his erection. Why is this a thing? Seriously, like, why do people feel the need to be so disgusting? Because the sad thing is, here she is in high school. Not to say that it makes a difference, but this is even done to elementary school age children. We both laughed in nervous disbelief and took off running to our homes. The man sped off in his fancy car. Thank goodness that something else didn't happen from that, because that could have been way worse. I went straight to my bedroom without saying a word to anyone, but my friend immediately told her parents, who called the police. An officer then telephoned my house and asked to speak with me. Much to my mother's surprise, she handed me the telephone and then stood listening as I did my best to downplay what had happened. It's not a big deal, I told the officer. It's nothing. The last thing I wanted was for a police officer to come to my house and start asking questions that might end up with my father being hauled off to jail. When I hung up the phone, I told my mom about the man in the Mercedes. She was upset about it and encouraged me to speak with the officer who had given me his number in case I wanted to add any details. It's fine, she said. You should talk to him. Go ahead. Good for her mother, because unfortunately, some non-polygamous, some monogamous moms would have encouraged her to not do anything. So good for her mom encouraging her to do it. I was silent. My only thought was, like, that would even happen. In my mind, it was better to say nothing about the pervert who had scared my girlfriend and me than to risk publicly exposing my family. For much of junior high, I worked to stay below the radar. I was a good student, but avoided the popular crowd, which wasn't hard since I didn't have the money to keep up with the latest styles or participate in many activities. I carefully thought through everything I did at school, weighing how it might put my family in jeopardy. When I was 15, I wanted to try out for the newspaper and yearbook staff. I asked my mom advice first. It will be fine, she said. But what if anybody says anything about our family? I asked her. What if they say she's a polygamous kid? It'll be fine, dear, she said again. So I forged ahead, putting my heart and soul into creating that required sample newsletter. To my delight, I was picked as co-editor. Miss Johnson, who knew my family background, even praised my creation to the class, nodding at me with the look that said, "Good job. You did it. You took a risk." A lot of the kids flaked out when it came to getting the work done, but I willingly took on extra responsibilities for finishing the yearbook. The next year, as I started high school, I joined the journalism class. Coincidentally, that's when my family hit a really rough patch. My dad was having a hard time finding jobs, so both my moms went to work. At the end of the 10th grade, my parents asked me, the oldest child, still at home, to switch to night school so that I could care for 4 younger siblings during the day. This is part of what I have a problem with. You wanted her to uproot her lifestyle so that she can take care of kids during the day and then go to school during the night. It just seems unfair to me. I love school and I was being asked to give up a lot. I really need your help, my mom said firmly. But I've been accepted to the journalism staff, I argued, urging my parents to consider their options. My dad said only one thing: this is what needs to be done. Y'all, that just made me mad. That just made me mad. So because y'all continue to keep popping out all these kids, this girl, and I think at this point 15, was forced to stop going to school during the day and go to school at night and be responsible for taking care of her siblings. Why her? She told us that she was the sorry y'all, my lip gloss. You know that little white thing? How long did y'all see that there and not tell me? Sorry. I was like, ugh. I hate when chapstick does that. Anyway, that was messed up. They decided to keep having kids, and as a result, she had to switch to night school. So I went to night school. Despite the hardship, I did not resent my parents. That's nice, because I would have, their lifestyle or our big family, for this change in my life. I wasn't into the social scene at school, so that didn't feel like a loss. My best friends and the people I was most comfortable with were fundamentalists too and attended different schools, and I knew I would still be able to finish my education. A smaller family would have meant less sacrifice, but I wouldn't have given up a single brother or sister. I believe then, as I do now, that family sticks together, does what it takes, and works through the challenges. There was a bigger plan than just what I wanted. Is this a part of that keep sweet mentality? Is this a part of working on things innerly? Because that seems like a big sacrifice to me, but it wasn't to her. Okay. Joe. I was 4 years old when I first experienced the power of prayer. As I said my evening prayers, I often had one special request. Dear Heavenly Father, I would say aloud, please help my dad quit smoking. My dad grew up rough as a teenager, developed some bad habits. As I prayed to one particular night, eyes shut, my dad happened to walk in my room. He stopped to listen. Right then and there, he quit cold turkey. My dad always said it hit him so hard to see his little boy praying like that he could never smoke another cigarette. My parents married in 1968 when my mom was 16 and my dad was 20. I was born a year later. It wasn't long before my first sibling came along, and there were 5 of us by the time I turned 8, the year I officially became a member of the fundamentalist Mormon faith. I was baptized on Easter Sunday at my dad's workshop, where an above-ground swimming pool had been set up and filled with tap water. 26 people were baptized, including I would later discover Alina, Vicky, and Valerie. So he got baptized the same time as 3 of his wives? Is that what he's saying? That's interesting. I didn't know what to expect when it was my turn. I walked up a little ladder and stepped into the pool. The water was so cold, I thought I might freeze to death. When I got baptized, I was 13, and that water was also cold. I'm going to say a little prayer, and when I say amen, I'm going to dunk you under the water and then pull you up, said Jim Jessups, a respected elder who was presiding over the baptisms that day. Okay, he added, waiting for my confirmation. I nodded my head. He said some words and then leaned me back so that I was completely under the icy water, gasping for air. I broke through the surface again. I was so stunned by the cold that some men had to carry me out of the pool. Okay, that wasn't my experience. I got right back up and ran out of there. The significance of that event changed how I look at things. Now that I was baptized member of the faith, I knew I had a responsibility to do right at all times. I was so afraid of making the slightest misstep that my mom had to intervene. Joseph's baptism is a promise to seek perfection, not expectation of perfection, she said. This came as a great relief. For one thing, I could once again stick up for myself in fights with my younger brother. By the time I was 11, I understood that my family was among the peculiar people who believed in polygamy and the old Mormon ways. I knew that my religious heritage went back 6 generations to Joseph Smith's era and founding of Mormonism. Israel, my great-great-great-grandfather, served as Smith's bodyguard, and the Mormon church had been around for just 14 years when James Owen, one of my other great-great-great-grandfathers, converted to the faith. Okay, so he's just letting us know that he's very connected to Mr. Smith. Owen, who would become the first police chief, was banished from his family's Pennsylvania home after joining the church in 1844. He never practiced polygamy. Decades later, when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints agreed to stop practicing polygamy, my ancestors were among those who continued to engage in plural marriage. Everyone in our middle class neighborhood in Taylorsville, Utah, knew that my family was different because we didn't attend Sunday services at the local LDS church. I joined the church-sponsored Boy Scout troop, though I sometimes went to other church activities for kids. The church also occasionally sent men to our home to try to convert my parents to the mainstream faith. My dad would just explain that we believed, and what we believed in that was that. Some neighbors were friendly, but others refused to let their children come to our house or to play with us. In time, we were no longer welcomed at church functions. Whew, that's tough. To turn away people from religious activities when you're an organization that's supposed to be showing love, to me, is a little rough, especially kids. Utah's construction industry was in a slump in the early 1980s. Unemployment was at a historic high of 10%. And even with just one family, my dad struggled to pay bills. The gas and the telephone services got turned off occasionally, and we came close to being kicked out of our home too many times to count. Anonymous donors sometimes made the house payment for us. They slipped money into my mother for food too, and made sure we had Christmas. It was hard on my dad, who didn't believe in accepting handouts. We couldn't afford vacations. I never left the state of Utah until I was 18 and on my own. Instead, my family went camping in the nearby canyons and made day trips to local reserves. Some of my cousins lived near Park City, where there was fun to be had outdoors all year long. And one grandfather owned a cabin in the mountains near Marysville that we visited frequently. But there was a lot of financial pressure, and it fueled some loud fights between my parents. Okay, so he grew up hearing his parents argue. My mother called me the family peacemaker because I intervened so often in their arguments. From an early age, my siblings and I were expected to help around the house. I weeded flower beds, tended my younger siblings, and cleaned up and deep cleaned the kitchen. I thought making applesauce was something we did each fall was the hardest work in the world. I often babysat for my parents and other relatives when I was paid. I willingly handed half of what I earned to my mother to help the family. That's nice. I was 13 when a woman expressed interest in my father and his family, and my parents began courting her. Even though they were struggling and going through all these things before having another wife, they courted. Several previous courtships hadn't worked out, so the whole family was praying this one would succeed. That summer, Aunt Mom, a term of respect I sometimes use for my dad's second wife, came into the family. My dad took 2 more wives after I left the home and had a total of 17 children. With Aunt Mom's arrival, I had to give up my large basement bedroom and was displaced in other ways too. Initially, I had figured it would be hard to adjust to a new mom, and it was. My dad had less time for me, and a mixed blessing. Aunt Mom took over many of my responsibilities, such as getting the younger kids up for school, sometimes cooking dinner, helping my mom when she had a new baby. I wasn't the only one affected, of course. My parents argued even more than they had before. It wasn't easy for Aunt Mom either. She had to adjust to new, already formed family and become an instant mother. I began to understand how hard it was to live plural marriage and why it was considered one of God's higher laws. So even though he witnessed all of this, he still had a desire to become a plural husband, or to be a part of polygamy. Let me say that. But within 3 months, my 2 moms had begun developing a close friendship, even taking ballet classes together. And I discovered that there were pluses to having a second mother that went beyond the extra help in our home. Mom was young and vibrant. My parents didn't listen to popular music, but Aunt Mom did. She introduced me to rock and roll, Journey, ABBA, and others. She also brought her own family values and culture. My dad, with the added responsibility of the new wife in the family, became more consistent in holding Sunday school and enforcing other spiritual matters. It took a few months for our Mormon neighbors to catch on to Aunt Mom. One day our house was plastered with tomatoes. I was sure it was because we had another mother. Being the oldest, I knew that my younger brothers and sisters would follow my example, so I tried not to react to such attacks. I think that it is terrible that people feel the need to do things like that. You don't have to agree with it, but to sit there and throw tomatoes at these people's homes, how childish were you? And if I was them, I would have threw tomatoes right back. Don't be like me, people. I wanted us to stay united, to be a powerful family that could not be splintered by outside forces. I prayed often that God would make me capable of withstanding persecution. My family faced challenges even without the meddling from the neighbors. The construction industry was so depressed that we were flat out poor despite my dad's efforts to get any work he could. He earned money as a stonemason, ditch digger, truck driver, fiberglass and marble finisher, drywall installer, framer, and the trade he settled on and excelled at, finished carpenter. My two moms started a babysitting business to bring in extra money. Some clients were polygamous, some weren't. My mothers were able to get food, staples, is that food stamps? Food staples, cheese, milk, canned beans from the federal Women, Infants, and Children program. That's exactly what it is. And for a brief time, we needed food stamps to get by. After Aunt Mom joined our family, I was more careful about what I told school friends and whom I invited to my home. One of my favorite classes in junior high school was history. Even though I cringed when my teachers talked about Mormon pioneers and plural marriage, invariably, if the teacher didn't make derogatory statements, some of my classmates would. I sat silently as they ridiculed the extremists who still practice polygamy. I didn't see my parents and relatives as extremists. I saw them as faithful. For the most part, though my family background didn't hinder me at school, I was big for my age. By ninth grade, wrestled on the varsity team. In high school, I was captain of the football team. This boosted my popularity among my classmates, especially the girls. But even then, my religious beliefs were beginning to shape me. Unlike some of my friends, I steered clear of cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. I liked several girls, but decided I never wanted to risk anything more than holding hands. One Halloween, I went to some friends to a haunted house in Salt Lake City. We bumped into some girls from school, including one I knew had a crush on me. I skipped the spook alley and stayed outside talking to her. Soon I was holding her hand and asking her to be my girlfriend. She said yes, and we ended up kissing. Later, I was embarrassed and even ashamed and vowed to keep myself clean from my future wife. So he felt that him kissing her was wrong. It was okay to flirt, but I had been taught that kissing was reserved for marriage, since outside that sacred union, it might lead to further temptation. When you're a young man and you have to learn to govern your passions, my dad told me. Staying virtuous was just one of the goals I set for myself in junior high. I added morning prayers to my daily routine and tried to read 15 minutes of scripture a day. I set my alarm from 5:30 to allow myself time to go on a 2-mile run before school. And I had constant no sugar bet going with my mom, who was a health food nut before it was trendy. Between the demands of home and school, I was learning to be a master at multitasking and time management. Most of the time, I didn't mind tending my younger siblings, even if it meant missing school occasionally. My mom had gave birth to her first 4 children at the hospital and had the rest at home, aided by a midwife. I was there for those home births, helping out by watching my younger siblings. Later, I would proudly note each baby's time of birth and weight in a journal I kept. That's sweet. My mom had health problems when one of my younger brothers was 18 months old, so for a while she slept with me at night. My mother was trying to wean him, and he would wake up crying at midnight again, and then at 3 a.m. wanting to nurse. I would have to coax him to go back to sleep. I was determined to keep at it until he slept through the night. So he helped his mom with feeding his brother. Our family went through times when Sundays were spent on formal, organized religious instruction at home, and other times when Sundays were spent visiting our grandmothers. Despite that inconsistency, I had a clear understanding of what my dad believed. He often talked to me about religion and his views on it. My mom tried to make learning the religion fun. One year, she started a Book of Mormon club. She would put money in a jar for a family activity like a trip to an amusement park every time we read so many pages of scripture. When I was 14, I realized I was the same age as Joseph Smith when he received the revelations that led to the creation of the LDS Church. In 1820, Smith prayed for finding the correct path to salvation. The Lord appeared to him in a vision and told Smith not to join any existing church. 3 years later, in September 1823, the angel appeared to the prophet and told him about the golden plates buried in hillside near his home in New York. The angel said the plates inscribed in the hieroglyphic-like language contain a history of the ancient peoples of America and the Savior's word, preaching the fullness of the everlasting gospel to them. Smith recovered the plates in 1827 with spiritual guidance, began translating into English, which is known as the Book of Mormon. Okay, so that explains the Book of Mormon. As early as 1829, while still involved in the translating of the plates, Smith received a revelation that God would, as in Old Testament times, sanction the practice of plural marriage. The prophet organized what is now known as the LDS Church in April 6 of 1830. He also published the Book of Mormon that year. Why can't I have a revelation, I wondered. I decided I would stay awake and pray all night in hopes of receiving my own heavenly visitor, but I kept dozing off as the hours ticked away. I would wake up, chide myself for having slept, and start praying again, only to nod off once more. By morning, I was disappointed that no angel had come to see me. I told my dad about it, and he said, "You did it only to prove something to God. He has to have a reason to grant my prayer. You have to have a purpose behind your prayer." My father was very hard character. He was strict disciplinarian like his father, who had spent a lot of time on the run in prison because of plural marriages. My dad lived in every state in the West during his childhood because his father had moved his 7 wives and 39 children from place to avoid persecution. That is no life for a child. My dad and his siblings, who used their surname Brown as an alias, always kept a dime and a slip of paper with a telephone number on it tucked into the socks they wore. They were to call the number if anything happened or they became separated from their parents. One day, as my dad was walking home from school, he saw some police officers in his front yard. His father had been charged with cohabitation again, but was still living at home while awaiting trial. The officers had come to subpoena his mother as a witness in the case. As it happened, his mother was in the hospital where she had given birth a day earlier to her 10th child, though no one answered the door to share that news with police. My dad kept walking, bypassing the home, and went to the nearby park, which was the family's prearranged meeting place in the event of trouble. An older sister was waiting there in the family car. He got in and she drove off. They never returned to that home. The next day, my grandfather moved his family to an abandoned ranch in New Mexico. My grandmother had heart problems and at age 42 died while hiding in the desert. I'm sure that the stress of having to move to all these different places did not help that situation. That was a lot. My dad was 12 and his life was even tougher from then on. I idolized my dad, as a lot of kids, especially the first sons, do. Even though I received the brunt of his harsh treatment, I looked for every opportunity to spend time with him, even if it was just running errands, doing chores, and working with them. After completing a shared task, my dad often took me golfing or to a movie and mall. My father had a solid moral compass. He treated people honorably and didn't pretend to be anything but what he was. Even though he never finished high school, he was a great reader and was always trying to improve himself. My dad was an early adopter of technology. We were the first people on our street to get a personal computer, a leading edge machine loaded with WordPerfect software. He had a big brick Motorola cell phone and a fax machine. My dad loved construction work. That was his livelihood, but he always encouraged me to find a different way to make a living. You're going to need an education in this next generation, he'd say. Compared to my many friends, I already understood a lot about the importance of a career, money, and what it meant not to have enough of it, especially if you had a big family. As I entered high school, I knew I was at a critical juncture. Choices I made now would have real effect on my life. There were so many things to figure out, which is why I set new goals for myself. Study, read, and pray often. Valerie. My twin sister Vicky and I always had lots of moms. There was our actual mother and 2 other mothers, our mother's 2 younger sisters, and our 3 older sisters. Yes, we hit mother load at birth. They all showered us with love and attention. My mother had 16 children, and we came right in the middle of numbers 8 and 9. One of her sister wives, Aunt S, also had 6 children, and the other, Auntie M, had 8. In other words, there were 40 children altogether in my father's combined family. Aunt M lived in Midville. My mother lived 20 minutes away on the east side of Salt Lake County. Aunt S lived in her own house just around the corner from my mother, which allowed them to share a car and tend to each other's children. Aunt S would often bring her sewing machine over to our house, and the two moms would sew and laugh and visit for hours. They never fought, at least not in front of the children. All three families got together on Sundays. My dad would read stories from the Book of Mormon, and the moms would take turns making lunch for the crowd. Okay, so they all lived in separate homes, but they met every Sunday. My dad would stop by each wife's house every day, regardless of where he was staying that night. So this is different than the Browns. He stopped by each house every day, no matter whose turn it was. My mom used to say she could set her watch by my dad's visits. As soon as he arrived, Dad would search out the children so he could give each of us a kiss on the cheek. I felt cheated if I missed mine for some reason. My dad never said much, but I always knew I had his love. He was kind and gentle because of his example. I couldn't imagine how any man could be mean and abusive to his wives or children. She must have not met the Browns yet. My dad worked in his brother's cabinet making shop. And when we were in grade school, my mother started a business called All Dolled Up to sell handcrafted porcelain dolls and teach doll making classes. She converted our living room into a classroom workshop, and it was always crowded with what seemed like millions of dollars in various stages of completion. People paid top dollar for my mom's dolls. Bride dolls were her specialty, with each doll fashioned to look just like a particular customer in her wedding gown, right down to the lace and the beadwork. That's neat. She let us make our own dolls too, patiently guiding our hands as we painted their perfect lips and eyelashes and sewed their little dresses. After a while, my mother went into partnership with her mother and Aunt S, who sewed and knitted doll dresses and little booties, and moved the business into a shop in Salt Lake City. My mom had a house full of children and her own business, yet she always found time to take us on picnics and on trips and take to the lake and the mountains for campouts. With so many children, money was always tight, but my dad was very frugal and we got by. As he went around the house giving out kisses, he also turned off every unneeded light. He could repair any appliance that broke down and didn't let anything go to waste, from food to clothing to electricity. He once removed the knob from our television set so that we had to unplug it rather than just turn it off to save power. We probably qualified for all kinds of assistance, but it was against my dad's values to accept aid. Instead, we were in the recycling kings and queens of the world. Every piece of clothing went through 3 or 4 kids until it had to be tossed because it was finally too holy or stained. My dad once bought home a carton full of shoes and an assortment of boots, tennis shoes and loafers in every size up to 13. He had purchased them at a bargain rate of $2 or $3 a pair at Kmart during some special sale, grabbing a pair of everything on the shelf and throwing it in his basket. He figured he either had a kid who could use it, a particular size now, or would need it eventually. It was 2 decades before the last pairs were claimed. When Converse shoes finally came back in style, my mom sewed many of our outfits, which cut costs too. When we were in 1st grade, we sewed Vicky and me cute wool plaid coats. At least we thought they were cute. The first time we wore them, the school nurse, who knew there were a lot of kids in our family, called to ask our mother if we needed money to buy winter coats. My dad loved to fish, and he would often take his children who were old enough with him on these trips. Sometimes we went along, females too, but most of these were father and son outings. Since my dad is Mr. Equal, he also made sure he spent special time with his daughters. He loved Chinese food and would sometimes take all the girls to Ming, a buffet-style restaurant. Give me 1 second, y'all, because... Oh, yeah, I'm about to end it because this is carrying on a little longer than I thought. Where am I? The servers would have to pull a couple of long tables together to seat Dad and as many as a dozen daughters. I wasn't very fond of Chinese food, but I loved these daddy-daughter dates. I loved having my extra brothers and sisters close by. I'm going to end it right there. I need to put a little marker here because it's 43 minutes in, and I don't even know how y'all gonna feel about me reading so long. So we're learning more about the background of each of the parents right now. I am still in chapter 1. So I'm going to pick up from this chapter probably tomorrow. Y'all let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time.